eavesdroppers. Welcome to the Mix and Mash podcast. My name is Beccah Grace, and I'm here with McConaughey. Today we'll be discussing part 2 of the miniseries. In this segment of the well-known franchise, the Losers Club have all grown up and moved on from Derry, with one exception, Mike. In the 30 years since their temporary defeat of Pennywise, also called It, most of the losers have become wildly successful. Mike, our outlier and self-dubbed lighthouse keeper, has remained in Derry, Maine in order to call and remind the others of their obligation to defeat the monstrous It once more.
Very good. So...
Took a little bit.
It's alright. I had a lot of practice when it came to the introductions for doing videos because whenever I would record them like in the garage for the reviews that I did by myself, every once in a while, it would come off like, "Hello, eavesdroppers, welcome to..." And I remember once, I used to send my audio out to somebody else. They would splice it onto a actual video format for a review. And they would say like, "Hey, you made a mistake here." And they're like, "You accidentally kept that part where you started cussing up a storm." And they're like, "I thought that was pretty funny." So with that being said, this is the second half of a review of the It miniseries. We took a look at the first half, which was the half dedicated to the children part of the story, which is also what was adapted in the 2017 It film. So for this one, we're going to look at the second half, which deals with the adults. Basically what this is as she said, the adults who had vanquished Pennywise 30 years earlier are back in Derry, and they are trying to fight it off again. So with that being said, just right out of the gate, which one do you prefer? Did you like the first part of the miniseries or this part of the miniseries more?
I definitely preferred the children's side because a lot of the times when they tried to do the commemorative parts in the second half, where they were reminding themselves of their childhood, and so they started doing things that they did as kids, it just kind of felt like it was poorly done. It just didn't feel like something adults would do. And, you know, even as a young adult, I'm half of what their age was supposed to be. So it just came off as overly cheesy, like children trying to show off in an adult body. And so the kids being kids felt honest in the first half, but the kids being grown-ups just didn't feel quite so...
natural?
Yes.
I would say, even whenever I was younger, even before we went ahead and watched these movies again so we could do the review, I hated this second half. I absolutely hated it. And I will say that with rewatching it now, I don't hate it nearly as much as I did, but I still have a lot of large problems with it. You did mention that it was a little awkward to see them doing things from their childhood. In particular, I always hated it because they did not have a consistency when it came to telling the story. And this is something we'll get into a little later with other parts. This is a thing that's carried across the board, not just from the miniseries, but from the new 2017 movie. I have this problem with the series, where there is this monstrous entity that is killing children, and we're just messing around, playing around, and those, as adults who know that children are being murdered, are sitting around riding their bikes and putting spokes on folks behind the wheel and all this. And part of it, yeah, you can go ahead and say that they're trying to keep their mind off it. They're trying to revisit nostalgia. But really, you should have a more amped up sense of severity. This is a situation you should be more afraid of. They're still cracking jokes. Like, I remember the guy he always looks like Jeff Foxworthy to me. Like, he had the voice of reason in this movie. There's a guy, he was a comedian, and he is very, very joke-oriented. And he makes comments about it. It's like, "Yeah, we're gonna go get eaten," and everyone laughs, and ha ha ha. But I'm like, yeah, you might, because that's the thing. It's a killer clown, and it's a monster. Of course you should have a chance of getting eaten. And yet you're not seeming that afraid. Like, they seem afraid in a very, very one-dimensional way. Like, they're afraid, but they're not afraid. Because they're not tensed up. They're not that worried. There's no sense of consistency across the board. And that only goes to make the antagonist feel even weaker.
And I agree with that the tension felt overly manufactured. It was like, I believe that if this was actually really happening, that you would never not have that overwhelming blanket of sorrow and fear over you. I don't think you would be able to go as carefree as they showed. You wouldn't be able to go from terrified to laughing the next section. It almost felt like the second half of the miniseries was exceptionally bipolar.
And a lot of people always try to, whenever I make criticisms like this, where I talk about the authenticity or the realism of a portrayal, a lot of people give me a bunch of rebuttals or defenses against it. They say, for instance, maybe they are in shock. They said that in the film they were just now starting to remember things again, remembering things from their childhood leading up to realizing the threat. But that doesn't work either, because it's something that carries on as the film progresses. They constantly have this feeling of just not taking him seriously, and that's a big deal for a horror movie if you don't take your threat seriously.
Then how are we supposed to?
And then it becomes, and it's something that happened with the first half of the miniseries, where I don't think that I took Pennywise very seriously overall. But the difference between that one and this one is there was a sense of camaraderie. I enjoyed watching the Losers Club interact and do things. Whereas with the adults, I don't really enjoy them very much. Their acting seems a little bit awkward. I feel like the acting is not that much worse than it was with the first half, like with the kids. I think that it's just they don't have as good a material to work with. But some of them just seem very, very over the top at some points. Specifically, the Jeff Foxworthy looking guy always seemed very, very over the top.
And I found myself surprised that he seemed to be the voice of reason most of the time. He was the one who's like, I don't want to get eaten. And, I can understand that. And then when they were going down to attempt and fight it for the last time to keep it from coming back in 30 years, because, as he said, he doesn't want to have to fight this thing when he's 70. He's like, why didn't we bring a machine gun? And I remember I turned to you in that moment. I'm like, why didn't he bring a machine gun? It seems that any weapon that they
didn't have any preparation for it either. They were fine with just bringing those 2 pieces of silver and the slingshot, but they didn't think to just bring weaponry, bring anything at all. And the thing is, they actually did have supplies. Mike had supplies with him that they had a chance to bring with them. But they went ahead and just left those, I suppose.
Yeah, they didn't wear... I noticed they didn't wear the boots. They barely had the flashlights. And I think a lot of critics would probably say, oh, well, regular bullets wouldn't affect this. And my rebuttal to that is, quite simply, they said that the reason why the silver worked is because they believed it would work. Same reason with the battery acid thing. So if you think a bullet is going to kill this thing, it would have killed him.
Which reminds me, is something I don't like about the It series, or not necessarily I don't like, but there's not really much explanation for what his weaknesses are, or exactly what he is. What he does, or what it does, and how you're supposed to fight against him. It seems very, very vague, and almost plot convenient. It works to the way to make the story progress.
Mm-hmm.
As far as this one, though, I would say that the reason this one isn't as good as the first half is because not only does it suffer from the same flaws that the first half did, it suffers from new flaws because the characters aren't as entertaining. And if we go back and we look at some of the scenes with Pennywise in this one scene that I always point out, one scene that always stood out to me was when the balloons were popping, and in the library, and there was this blood spats, and the thing is, nobody else can see what's going on, but yet they're reacting to it. When the balloon pops, like, their eyes blink, and do that. They didn't go the extra mile with making this come off as authentic and realistic. And once more, Pennywise just does not seem like a threat at all in this series.
Yeah, especially in the second half. The first half, even though it was pretty jokey, he at least felt like a sort of threat, because these are children. They're only 12, they only know so much, and things in the closet are still scary when you're 12. I mean, I slept with a teddy bear into my 20s. I was afraid of the dark. That happens when you're in your younger years, when you're 12, but when they're adults, what's left of Pennywise's attempt to scare them just kind of seem like a horror house mismatch of sadness. It's like, woo, I got a mask and we're done. All right, I got 15 minutes.
Nixon mash, kind of mash. And roll credits. With that being said, I feel like I don't have nearly as much to say about this one, whereas whenever we were talking about the first half, it went into like 20 minutes of just discussion. I feel like I've already said everything I have to say about this one.
And I agree. I admit I was disappointed, and the only scene that I did thoroughly enjoy, which oddly enough, the one that I enjoyed was the balloon popping scene, because I thought that it had so much potential, but I don't think it would have been possible for the producers to have produced it the way they wanted to, because the only way they would have had zero reaction out of all of the characters when the balloons are popping in their face is if they were animation, and if they were animation from that time, it would have looked terrible. So I thought that they did good with what they had, but I think, maybe they could have desensitized them a little better to keep the flinching to minimal.
I was going to say, I think that they could probably have made some effort in terms of not getting them to react. Because I don't think the problem is necessarily that they reacted as much as that they blink. And for that, you could work it around. You could just have the balloon pop only in front of, say, the woman who had glasses on. Mm-hmm. So that way she wouldn't need to blink because she has glasses on. And it might take a couple takes, but still, I don't know. I guess we do have to give it some credit because it's a TV movie from the 90s, so we can't be that picky when it comes to those scenes. It's still, though, if we're being honest, in a review, and just reviewing it for what it is, I still would say that those were weak points. Definitely could have been done better, and maybe we'll get to see them done better in the new It Chapter 2.
And I agree, and I'm really hopeful for It Chapter 2. I hope that it comes out well, and I'm very excited for it, especially seeing Pennywise, because I loved him so much more in the newer series. All in all, I'd say the second half of the miniseries was disappointing in a lot of things. Characters that Sick Boy Eddie Spaghetti, as the Joker would call him, his death just seemed It almost felt like it was without reason. Like they were trying to dip back into the previous part, but all it did was it just looked sad. Which I think is kind of how a lot of the second half felt. Like they were trying to touch on the good parts of the previous one, and they just failed. So, all in all, it wasn't a horrible movie, the miniseries as a whole, but I will say that I agree that the first half was definitely better.
So what I come to conclude with is that whereas the first part had its problems but had some enjoyable aspects, this one does not have those enjoyable aspects and makes even more mistakes. And because of this, there's no real redeeming quality to me for the second half, whereas with the first half, there were redeeming qualities. That said, that's really all I have for this review. If you like this video, if you like what we do on this channel, feel free to subscribe. And feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below letting us know what you thought about the It miniseries as a whole. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Have a good evening, eavesdroppers.